many of you come from meetup for the first time? One, sir? No way, Corey. You're messing around. So my name is Vivian. A few of you I have met in the past. I'm the organizer for NYC Open Data. I'm really into open data. That's why I started the meetup about 2 years ago in May 2013. And at that time, I was teaching people how they can use 311 data to find out where the intersection you can find most mouse sightseeing and where you can complain. So gradually, like in November, people asked me to offer corporate training and classes. That's how I started NYC Data Science Academy. So last week we launched a new website, last Friday, and this Monday we launched a new data engineering bootcamp. So we have 12 weeks data science bootcamp running, and a lot of our students are in the back, and they're looking for jobs. If you guys want to hire, feel free to talk to them. Like the one just waving, he got PhD from Stony Brook, maths major. So we have a lot of talented people here. We have David here. He hired one of our students. Thank you very much. Okay, cool. So if you have any question about what we offer, feel free to our website or talk to me or Jenna. She's the CEO in the back. Okay, cool. Today our student did a Shiny project, so I just want to show quickly. Like Danny did the airplane comparison tool. It's done by Shiny. This is a malpractice lawsuit. Who get lawsuit the most? MD. And we have superpower. We have a trader from Paris. He told us how people trading emissions in US, and especially focusing on the east side. I can zoom in. So it's awesome work. We have students finish the federal budget in order to debate in their July 4th holiday party with her Republican family member. We have healthcare explorer. We have a student from Netherlands. She's working for Philips, right? So yeah, so he's very interested how people are purchasing those medical equipment. So we have a lot of interesting things going on. We welcome you to bring your own data set and your project to us. We will do it free, and we will give you the best talents. Okay, so that's it. It's my great pleasure to welcome Ben Wellington, the very well-known blogger, IQuantNY. The first time I know about him is the taxi driver who is charging more tips. I also noticed he found what's the fire hydrant charge the most money. And the city make change. They repaint the road so people no longer getting tickets. So data crunching really help us to make the life better, and I hope you will enjoy tonight's talk. Come over. And Ben got PhD from NYU of computer science major, and his specialty is natural language processing. And yes, okay.
Though I won't, that's not what I'll talk about today, but that is what I studied back in my PhD program. As I said, hi, I'm Ben. Pleasure to be here today. I run this blog called IQuantNY. My mission is kind of to quantify all the mundane, stuff that the city puts out that no one ever looks at. And I'm like, oh wait, this is great material because no one wants to sit around looking at parking tickets. But I'm like, I do. So I get to kind of dive in and find fun things. So today I'm going to give a talk in kind of three parts. First, I'm going to talk about open data policy, where we are in New York City today, what things aren't really working very well, what things maybe look kind of better. And then I'm going to talk about some of the lessons I've learned while writing this blog over the last year and a half about data science and what kind of connects people. And lastly, talk about some of the impact that the data science on the blog has had on New York City in different ways and interacting with government agencies. So it's kind of in three parts. We'll start with some policy, and I have my requisite almost Venn diagram, but it's not quite connected yet. So I didn't know it, but I guess I call myself a data scientist now because this term came up, and I'm like, I'm diving in. I'm a data scientist. Why not? So I work at a firm called 2 Sigma. It's an investment management firm. I've been there since graduating from NYU in 2007. In essence, we look in all different places with all different data sets to try to predict where markets are moving on behalf of our investors, who are made up of things like pension funds and other such things. So it's a very scientific method-based approach to investing, but what's neat about it is that it's all about finding new ways to look at things with different kinds of data sets, and not just like prices, but going out and finding things like traffic information or subway turnstile turns or whatever it is, and what that tells us about our economy and about companies. So that's what I've done for quite a while. Along the way, I married an urban planner, which is pretty cool. And for most of the time, our lives were kind of pretty separate. I was kind of data nerd, she was kind of into urban planning. Things changed a little bit in 2000, I believe it was 12, where Mayor Bloomberg signed here in New York the Open Data laws. The Open Data laws are really cool. They basically tell city agencies, hey, it's great that you can give us some facts and figures and tweak little graphs and things and put out PDFs with things on them. But what if, along with that, you gave us your raw data, right? We could do a lot with that. So Mayor Bloomberg signed into law in 2012 the Open Data legislation, which gave a lot of agencies till 2018 to come into compliance. So we're still seeing this happen very slowly. It always struck me what he said that day in his quote. He said, across city government agencies use data to develop policy, implement programs, and track performance. Each month, our administration shares more and more of this data with the public at large, catalyzing the creativity, intellect, and enterprising spirit of computer programmers to build tools that help us all improve our lives. So this is the 2012 view of open data. Hey, computer programmers, let's do this. Here's all this data, computer programmers. Do what you want to do. And they're like, we're going to make these big app competitions. Maybe you've heard of the New York City big app competitions. How do you get programmers? You get app competitions, and we'll get all the programmers to come out. And they all come out, and it actually works pretty well. All these people every year, this is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. More and more people are writing apps. And this is sort of the way that New York City has approached open data is through this app process. Why is that a little weird? Well, if we look at this comment, it's always struck me. And maybe, I happen to be a computer programmer. Oh, so they had Keynote on here, and I had PowerPoint, so things don't line up. This is supposed to circle computer programmers. Although I do appreciate the enterprising spirit as well. This is what happens when we change, but that's okay. Game time to change. Computer programmers. What was interesting to me was that they were like, look, open data is all about computer programmers. I was like, well, no, it's a lot bigger than that. I teach at Pratt urban planning, and I teach students there. So basically, it's a basic statistics course. So it's not really that exciting, but I try to make it fun by using sort of open data. And so instead of the textbook's kind of out, and New York City data sets are in. And if you're going to learn a t-test, which no one really wants to learn if you're an urban planner, at least you can do it on New York City urban data. So at least it's mildly interesting. So so I think that this kind of showed the city was missing the point, and the enterprising spirit apparently. But so I think the city saw open data through computer programmers apps to the public, and this is the future of the world. And I've always felt that it's a lot bigger, that there's room for policymakers and to start looking at data, nonprofits, planners, news agencies, corporations, citizens, data scientists, right? All sorts of people can kind of step in and look at this, and we don't all have to be, computer programmers, especially as the tools are starting to lower the bar, right? If we have, things like there are certain apps that are, we've always had Excel, but you have like a Tableau coming in, which is starting making things a little easier. You could probably use Tableau if you're not a programmer and still tell interesting stories. So there's a lot more going on than the city was kind of recognizing. Today, if you go to the Open Data portal, you'll see this beautiful page. I always want to hit that and open it up, but it doesn't work. It's basically these groups of and it's funny, they put like the data sets they release for big apps. For some reason, like they just put in the big apps category, even if they're transportation related. It's very weird. But this is the way they've chosen to organize things. It's all housed by this company called Socrata out in Seattle. Socrata kind of has the market on this in many cities, and they kind of run the open data portals for more and more cities across the country, and they do some cool stuff. But what happened when that was released is that I could kind of say, look, let's take this data science and this urban planning and put it together, and like I said, try to make this interesting class. my goal at first was to make students not hate statistics, so I had to come up with interesting homework assignments to make them not hate statistics. That became, about a year and a half later, I said, well, these are kind of cool things. I'm going to start writing this blog. So I started to take what were homework assignments and putting them on this blog, and that kind of spread around. The blog I called IQuantNY. It's really about kind of, as I said, quantifying things. So that's where it all came from. So one of my first projects, by the way, I'm not a web developer by any, I don't know JavaScript, and I'm not like a visualization person, so bear with me as I show you these plots. If you are into like data visualization, you'll complain about my, apparently red and, I've sinned against colorblind people and other such things. I apologize, but I am learning that portion of the world. Data I understand, visualization I'm still working on. Anyway, this was a heat map. How did I create it? Well, there's this great open source software, QGIS. It's for spatial analysis. You can take things like polygons and lay them on top of polygons and do intersections and unions and distances, all the things that, like, as a computer scientist, or especially if you're into math, I mean, you understand unions, intersections. Suddenly, you've got this rich world of, like, let's take every lot as a polygon and take, like, every Starbucks as a point and find the building farthest from a Starbucks in New York and see who lives there. And say, you, sir, live farthest from a Starbucks in New York. And they're like, get off my lawn. But you can start to do cool things as a computer scientist when you think spatially. QGIS, I kind of taught myself. And this was me importing some bicycle collision information. So this is where bicycle collisions happen in New York. And then what did I do? I went to like file, something like heat map, generate. And I got this. I was like, all right, that was hard. So I made this. And there are some interesting things to see here. That's like Williamsburg. You can see, by the way, that it's the east side that has the most bicycle collisions. Probably because that's where all the bicyclists are. Probably because the bridges empty out all the, the hip Brooklyn bicyclists or sort of all go up here, and maybe that's probably what that is. But Williamsburg certainly has a lot of cyclists and therefore a lot of injuries. And then we have streets like Roosevelt Avenue in Queens, which clearly pop out in just a very, very simple analysis like this. I want to point out, though, that this data came from one of these guys. We all, if you do data analysis, maybe you don't like this symbol. It's not good. PDFs, right? PDFs are the way that like a government can put out data without actually letting us look at it. They love PDFs because the legislators pass laws that say you must report quarterly. And they're like, oh yeah, PDF, like take that. And they're like, no one can touch that, right? PDF, So it's very annoying because you know that the PDF was generated from some structured source somewhere. Like there's some guy who turned the database into a PDF, and then you have all the people trying to turn the PDF back into data. And the whole process is outrageous, but it is currently, if you go to like Open Data Movement, like Beta NYC is a wonderful civic hacker group here in New York. A large chunk of their projects is PDF scraping. So you have this suck of talent, like taking data that's been released and making it usable, which is just the city making work for us all. It's very unfortunate. And by the way, these accidents came in PDF form. So imagine this is every accident on one row in PDF, and there's like 10,000 accidents. You can imagine what this PDF looks like. It just goes on for thousands of pages. And it kind of remained like this because of reporting requirements until this guy, John Krause, came around, and he built this awesome tool called the NYPD Crash Data Band-Aid, which is a great name. It would go on the NYPD's website, look for PDFs, download them, extract CSVs, and post them on his website as a mirror. So once he did that, I was able to go and make that map by just doing, I didn't have to do any work because, thank you, he did all the hard work. So I like to, and by the way, so much of it, like our city is in PDF form. This is our city budget. Our legislators get PDFs of our budget and then have to vote on our budget, but like hours later. So they're like, here's a 20,000 page PDF, yes or no? Yes or no? Yes! Okay, we passed the budget. I feel like it's kind of like that. But they can't analyze anything because it's all in PDF form. Our own city council is getting our budget in PDF form before voting on it. This is where we are today as a city. And you have things like the Citizen Complaint Review Board, whose job it is to oversee the NYPD, right? You'd think that they'd want, like their entire existence is about oversight. You'd think they'd want their data to be used. But for the most part, all of their data is generated into PDF reports and put onto their website. So we have these gaping holes. I call this semi-open data. It's like, they're kind of there. I love that you put the PDF out. Way to go. But we're spending so much valuable talent to make what I call, public data to be actually public. So this is where we are today, very, very actively. This is like a big open problem in New York. There's a lot of push to get legislators to write lines into their legislation that say, you must include machine-readable format. Like that sentence would do a lot. And there's education going on across the city with all different legislators to try to make that start to happen, but it's going to take some time. So in the world without open data, we used to see just charts like this one. This is just a view of the Taxi and Limousine Commission licensing of all different kinds of cars. So this is just the count of how many for-hire vehicles, borough taxis, black cars, other such things. So, in a pre-open data world, the only things we really got to ask were the things that someone at an agency said, I bet someone wants to know this. And that's where these plots come from, right? Somebody might want to know the count. I better make a report. Here you go, public. Or, somebody wants to know this question. Here you go, public. That's where all of our view of government comes from. And you can imagine that maybe that's not the most non-biased view, right? When the person in the agency is in charge of releasing these plots. So that's a little dangerous. But also, how do they know what we all want to know? Like, we all have our own questions that we might want to ask. So I look at data like, the taxi data is awesome. It's basically these cabs driving around with GPS recorders, marking every single ride, when they pick someone up, when they drop someone off, how long it took, the route they took, the tip, it's like such an awesome data set. And then we get like plots like this from it. So we're like, all right, we can do more. So I had a question which was like, when is rush hour in New York City? And I was like, we have all these GPS recorders driving around New York. Why don't we take the average speed of the cabs? And we'll try to guess when rush hour is. So I found that at 5:18 in the morning is when cabs are fastest. They're going 24 miles an hour. And at 8:35, they go, it's like that's an amazing little shift there, but they go down to 11.5 miles an hour. And it turned out they stay at that speed all day. So there's no rush hour in New York, just a rush day, which was a fascinating finding. If you need to get to the airport or whatever, just set your alarm for like 5 in the morning, you're good, otherwise you're in trouble. You can see kind of this bump here we'll talk about later, that's the shift change. And we'll talk about that. But these are the kind of questions that we can start to ask for the first time in our city's history, because we have access to public data, which is so cool. And there are so many questions we can ask about taxis. Are people charging the right fare code when they take you somewhere? Or, who's the most efficient driver in all of New York? Like, you can find that now. You can be like, sir, you picked up more passengers than anyone else per hour in the entire fleet. Let's learn from that person. Let's go interview them and find out what they're doing. You picked up the least. No, we don't want to talk to that person. That's good. You can look at things like the median tipping rate per neighborhood. This is green cab data, so Manhattan's kind of out. But I was curious whether the neighborhood you live in affects your tip that you give on top of a cab. It turned out that it seemed to. The Bronx, the dark red had tips between 0% median and 8%, and the bright green was is all 20. Basically 19 to 20%. So the neighborhood we live in really does affect our tipping rate. I'll gotta follow up with this with Manhattan, but interesting kind of finding. So if we look even at this taxi data, though, I was kind of getting ahead of myself, because where did this data come from? It came from something called a Freedom of Information Law request, or FOIL request. At the federal level, these are called FOIA, F-O-I-A. Maybe you've heard that term. In New York, it's called FOIL. One is an act, one is a law. I don't know the difference, but maybe one of you does. In New York, when you fill out a FOIL request, it basically says to an agency, hey, I want your data, and you have to give it to me. And they basically do, unless there's certain things like interagency communication doesn't count, a private thing, they can take out this and that, and what's left they actually have to give you. So the TLC, instead of posting their data online for people to download, they post a form online that you have to submit. You can fax it to them or mail it in to this address. So you actually say, hey, TLC, I would like data. So this guy, Chris Wong, did just that. And they said, all right, just come down to our office with a brand new hard drive, drop it off, and we'll give you the data, which kind of sounds like a really weird day in the modern age to transfer data. But that is the way that's what we're seeing today. So Chris did that, and he actually took it, brought it back, and then posted it online. And that kind of spurned all sorts of really cool analysis, because for the first time, the fact that you have to fill this out and go down to the hard drive, just makes no one does it. So the data's not really out there. I mean, it is out there. We have to know it. And now it's out there, and cool things are happening all around, and I could do my analysis. So I also call this semi-open data because we're putting up these the data's there, but you got to fill out this form. And imagine, they have people whose full-time job it is to reply to these FOIL requests. So imagine the waste when you can put it online or have it, like that person is basically like a download link. Like they're there, like it's such a not a good situation for anybody. So we see this across government. The Tax and Limousine Commission is actively working on fixing this, and hopefully we'll see some changes this year. Another map I did was basically not the prettiest map. This is levels of fecal coliform in New York City waterways. Basically sewage runoff. So exactly, sewage. That's good. So what happens is in New York, our whether you know it or not, our sewer systems go to the same place as our drainage on the streets. Okay, so we have what's called a combined sewer, and they have these things called combined sewer outflows. So what happens when it rains a lot, like probably I assume today, it rained like crazy. So the system can't keep up with all of our sewage and all the street things. So what do? I imagine there's some like giant lever somebody pushes and like, oh, it's gonna blow. It's probably not what happens. But they basically release it all into our waterways. That's the best place for it. It's better than our streets, I guess. So many times a year, our waterways get flowed out with sewage. You'll see signs go up at like Jones Beach saying, you may not swim for the next 3 days, or like at Rockwood. Different beaches will say that. That's what's happening. So I was curious, which water has the most, for lack of a better word, poop in it. So I mapped, and this is kind of a challenging problem because I couldn't take the mean levels because there were these crazy outliers. Like days where it rained a lot, it would be like 1,000 times more than other days. So the mean on any spot wasn't that interesting. I couldn't take the median because like on a regular day, it's usually fine. So that wasn't going to work because like unless more than half the days are bad, that's not interesting. So what I did is I looked at the percentage of the time that the level was so high it would be illegal by New York state law to swim in the water. So it was basically, has it reached the legal threshold percentages? So I found that this place, Coney Island Creek, was actually, it would be illegal to swim in 94% of the time. This is not the Coney Island you swim in, that's a little circle, which is not great either, but it's better. But Coney Island Creek is on the other side of Coney Island. So 94% of samples taken over the last 5 or 6 years would have levels illegal to put in. And they actually just installed a fishing pier in that waterway. So there's interesting things happening. This is not like what you find on the front of NYC.gov, right? They're not going to just go out and say, hey, everyone, this is the grossest area. By the way, other big hotspots, the Bronx River was number 2, which was, I think in the 70s. The Gowanus was in the top 10. That's what everyone talks about. And actually, that flooded today. I don't know if you saw. The Gowanus had a horrible flood today. So not only is it a safety thing when it's in the water, but when it comes into your basement, it's also not pretty. So if you look at where that data came from, it also wasn't that simple. It was actually on the Department of Environmental Protection's website, and you wouldn't really know to look there. I mean, you could find it, you Google, you eventually find it. But it's not on the City Open Data portal, because the agencies don't really have time to move the stuff to one place. They're busy, they got agencies to run. So you go here, and if you were to open up each of these, what you'd find is that in different ones, they have different headings. So they change the way that they name their data sets from year to year. And then they add a something like take away saying, so you can't just like download them all and cat them all together as like a CSV or something. You have to go in and move things and normalize, and it just takes a lot of time. And you have to know that it's even here. It's not centralized. So let's take all the data. Let's forget all those things. The foiled data, the data that's not normalized, the data that we have to use PDF scrapers. There is some data left if we get rid of all that data, and it's the data that's on the Open Data portal. Today, the Open Data portal looks like this, though the front end is changing very soon to a new version, which other cities have rolled, and New York is behind. But you have this view. It's a CSV view, kind of. And you can download your data in any format you want, whether it's CSV or PDF if you so choose. I don't know why you would. This is parking tickets, by the way. And even though once you get all this data in this format, what happens? Well, every agency has their own encoding for addresses. So the Department of Education calls it an address, a state _ code. And then Department of Consumer Affairs calls it an address building, an address street name. And New York City Health Department calls it building street, 311, intersecting street name, police department, cross street 1, cross street 2. So every agency has their own address encoding, and there's no GPS, longitude, latitude recordings, and most of this stuff. So you're kind of on your own, mapping agency to agency to agency. What's that?
There is a city mechanism that they give you. You can pump these things to, and it's the city Department of Planning.
Yeah, I know that API. It's a little rough, and the idea would be to have them do that. So if they did that, then only one person does it. If we do that, millions of people do it. The strain on the API would be much higher by outsourcing that to all of us to run it through. I agree that there are ways to geocode things. But the inefficiency of having your customers geocode things is outrageously bad for the city and for all of our sanity, because then people have to write code for it. So it's not that you can't do this, it's the inefficiency that it's creating. So pushing normalization upstream creates a great experience for your users, right? Pushing it downstream means we all have to spend time doing it. So I actually call this semi-open data too, right? We're using all this talented normalized data repeatedly. And there's some other things that happened. This was a great, you guys remember the measles scare earlier this year? I don't know if you remember. Everyone's talking about measles. We see some head shake. There were a lot of articles. The New York Post wrote, private schools putting New York City at risk from measles outbreak, right? New York Magazine said, immune to logic, some New York City private schools have dismal vaccination rates. This sounds pretty bad. WNYC, religious schools lead the vaccine opt-out list. So we have all these things, and if you look, what's so cool nowadays is that sometimes, for the first time, you can go and see what reporters are looking at and dive in and understand for yourself. This is a case where all the reporters were using a public data set, which I love. I wish more people would release their data when they do analysis on it, but we'll leave that for a little later. This is a New York State data set. It was called the School Immunization Survey, beginning 2012 to 2013. What it did is it listed every school in the city and in the state, and whether it was public or private, and what the immunization rate for that school was. Okay, and this is interesting, but there was a problem. The data set contained all public and private schools in New York, except for all public schools in New York City. Just a little part. So what they did for public schools in New York City is they gave you a single number per borough. So instead of a school level, they gave you a borough level number. So they said the average student in Brooklyn is this. So all the private schools had reporting, and all the public and private schools in the state, but not New York public schools. So it creates this weird thing where we have school level data and no public schools in New York City, borough level vaccination. So what do we know? We know two facts by looking at this data. The average private school has a vaccination rate of 97%. The average public school student has a vaccination rate of 98%. What is the difference between a school and a student? Well, if you think about it, if you do it at a school level, you're weighting small schools and big schools evenly, right? So a school with 5 students in it is going to count the same as a school with 1 million students in it, if they're 2 schools, right? But if you do it at student rate, then it would count much smaller, right? So we've got kind of these two views on the same data set. One is school level, one is student level, okay? When we get to a place like this, what do reporters do? They have deadlines. They ain't missing data, right? These things aren't comparable. What do? Well, they compare them anyway, right? New York Magazine says, for comparison among the more than 800 private schools in the city, overall minimum immunization rate last year was 97%, and public schools, the rate is above 98%. So we're starting to see public, this missing data is causing public kind of misinformation to start getting spread by our newspapers. I don't know if I want to blame the reporters or the city for giving these half releases and kind of making people fill in the blanks. The New York Post just decided to pick a random number to compare it to, and just chose the percent of public school students receiving religious exemption rate, which is a very small subset of those who are not immunized. And WNYC, who overall obviously does really great work, and I love their data stuff. But this one, they had a headline, religious schools lead the vaccine opt-out list. And they said, using state data, WNYC found 165 schools in this area, public and private, where more than 10% of the students don't have their shots. Interesting fact. So I was like, religious schools lead the opt-out list. So how can religious schools lead a list that doesn't have the public schools on it? So I contacted the reporter. I was like, what is this list? Like, where did you get the list? I'm like, well, we said in this area. So we were not just talking about New York. The public schools were from the greater New York area, not including New York. And the private schools are from New York. So you have a little bit of fudging going on. I probably should have been more clear about it. So the very list that's being cited is not New York based. So we create like all this kind of these assumptions. It turns out that according to USA Today, at least 1 in 7 public and private schools in the country have vaccination rates below 90%. Here in New York, our private schools, which everyone has said is dismal and the world's ending, are 1 in 12. And 90% is like the herd immunity level where they consider it safe. So while nationwide 1 in 7 for public and private, in New York we're 1 in 12 schools are below the 90% level. So actually it's almost 2 times better than the national average, despite all the headlines saying something else. So when you see headlines like this, take a minute and go and see where the data came from and start to ask questions. And you can learn a lot about where headlines come from, where analysis comes from. So in this case, releasing the data, the way the city maybe thought they were being, I don't know what they were hiding or tricky or political or technological. I don't know what the problem was, but it was a bad decision because it led to misinformation. So I hope that's kind of a lesson for New York as a whole. So where are we today? Well, the great news is that we have more data than ever. So this may sound all really bad, but I'm kind of picking where the issues are. Compared to 5 years ago where we didn't really have anything, this is amazing. We can do all these really cool things. But there are small things a city can kind of improve upon. Whether that's because we're wasting so much time making our public data more public, replying to these FOIL requests, normalizing data, and missing data are all kind of really major issues. So that's my kind of talk on where we are with open data policy. I'll finish with sort of some late-breaking developments from today. I'll go back to what I've learned while doing this blog. So I went back to this because I find it to be a really fascinating example where I went to like file, save as, heat map, and like put it on the blog. And it was literally just me learning QGIS. Like, I don't know. I was like, this looks interesting. So I put it out. And when I did, reporters just started to report on it. And I was like, it was interesting. So I saw that Gothamist, 2013 selecting injuries, they said they mapped. This Brooklyn blog, traffic fatality maps Pegg's Broadway stretch of Williamsburg as a death trap. It's like, whoa. The Brooklyn paper actually had a headline, Killingsburg. I was like, that wasn't me. And then I was on Streets blog, and then eventually it went over to the Atlantic, to their City Lab blog. And this kind of spread around. And I was sitting there going, this is weird. I literally just went to file, save as. Like, why is this spreading all around? And I gave a lot of thought to it over the coming weeks to figure out, well, what is it that's causing things to kind of to spread? And I realized that there was kind of a third leg to the I guess data science I was doing that maybe wasn't as obvious. And this maybe don't see it coming, but I'm going to say improv comedy. All right. So I'll tell you what I mean by that. So I've been doing improv for a long time, and it turns out that I think as important as the data science was, and in this case the New York City aspect was, is this idea of storytelling. Okay. If you do a bunch of analysis and then you write like a technical, I use Python, and put like no one except for other technical people are going to actually care, right? Which is fine if that's your goal. But if your goal is to reach a wider audience, you have to kind of figure out what level to abstract out. And really there's a lot of sort of storytelling that goes into that. So I started calling what I was doing data storytelling to kind of reinforce to myself that I wasn't just sort of science, that I actually had an audience that I was trying to go for. And on my blog, I'm trying to kind of go for for just somebody who lives in New York, not people who care about hidden Markov models, like whatever it is. So there are some things I thought about on the improv and storytelling front. And first, in improv, when you do scenes, you want to like connect with your audience, and you do that by like finding really human moments or things that everyone can kind of relate to. So like for example, maybe you do a scene brushing your teeth in front of a mirror, talking to some significant other or something. People might say, "Oh yeah, I know that feeling when you're getting ready for bed," and they kind of connect emotionally. So I think about as I walk around New York, like what are they really like feeling or thinking about in New York? What's very New York things that I can connect to? And so in a crazy example, I was thinking, what is so New York that I could write about? And I realized that there's nothing more New York than Dwayne Reed. So I decided for every single, this is like a one nearest neighbor thing. Once again, it's very cool. You take the polygons of every building in New York. There's a data set called Pluto, and it has every lot in New York City. So you take every lot in New York City, and then from Google Local, I got all the pharmacy locations, and then I said, for every lot, I want the closest pharmacy. So it's really just like a nearest algorithm that QGIS can just do. It's like, you say one nearest. And so I rejoined it, and then I colored every building by the pharmacy that was closest to it. This is Times Square here. So we're out over here in Dwayne Reed country. But things like a Walgreens in Times Square can have kind of a big impact. But really, yeah, New York is very Dwayne Reed. As you zoom out and look at the rest of Manhattan, you can really see Dwayne Reed is pretty up there. But you also can see that Rite Aid and CVS are attacking from the water. Like, you may have the center need, but we'll take the water. You can really see it. Like, it's really crazy. Walgreens moves it. Look, they're just like, that's right. You didn't think of that, Dwayne Reed. And this is, I did this not because, I imagine these companies found this interesting because they can figure out where to put their next little thing to, it's a game theory. It's like that. But in general, I did it because it spread around just because people think about these kind of things in their day-to-day life. And that's something I'm trying to connect to. Like, what do people think about? How can I hit them kind of a little bit emotionally, or something that they think is kind of fun? And if we zoom out all the way, is New York Dwayne Reed country? Apparently not. Manhattan is Dwayne Reed country. It looks like the rest of our city. It looks like Rite Aid owns the Bronx. Walgreens and CVS are fighting over Staten Island. And the rest of the city, it seems to be a little bit of a crapshoot. But it's fun because you can see like some pharmacies are kind of boxed out by other ones. So like, there's like someone put a Dwayne Reed there, and then they got surrounded by Walgreens. Well, now they're the same company, so that's less interesting. But like, there's other things. I guess the point is that New Yorkers tend to just walk to the closest pharmacy. They're not like, I'm going to walk 2 more blocks to go to Rite Aid instead of CVS. Right? That never happens. So it's an interesting map for that matter. I also think a lot about, in storytelling, not to make things too complex, and try to come up with a single idea. So like, my idea for this scene is this, not this and this and this and this and this. And so much of data science, we're giving these giant data sets with all these columns, and it's like, what do I do with this thing? It's got so many columns of information, I'm overwhelmed. And this happens a lot. So I always say to myself, well, what's a single idea? When I make a visualization, if I look at it, I want to make sure I walk away learning something new. If it just looks pretty or is cool, that's fine if that's your goal. But if your goal is to tell a story, then you've got to make sure that you've told a story. So this is a map of city bike stations in New York, colored by the gender of the riders at that station. So what we can see is that up in this neighborhood, that's Times Square again, but up in that neighborhood, we have 80 to 90% male ridership. So if you were to stand and watch the city bike stations out here, you'd probably see 80, 90% male. If we go down to the Lower East Side or Brooklyn, you'd see more like 60 to 70% male, so a higher percent of female ridership. If you think about it, this like the city bike data set has lots of information, but I've just kind of focused on location and then just like gender. Interesting story there. A lot of time I look for stories by taking a single column of information and looking for outliers or the most or the least, and that sometimes which driveway in New York is blocked the most often. Like that's an interesting story, and usually you can find that. So I think about keeping things simple very much in my visualizations. Maybe that's partially because I don't have I don't know like D3 and other such things, so I can't really do complicated things. So maybe that's why I keep it simple. But I also truly believe that that simplicity has its place as well.
No area has like less.
No station has no station had a majority women ridership. Yeah. So in the center of every polygon would be a station, and then I did something called, what is it, Voronoi? I never can pronounce it. What is it? All right, Voronoi, it's Voronoi or something. I apologize for not knowing the pronunciation because I only see it on my screen. So but what it is for every dot, it gives you a polygon of the area closest to that dot. So if you have a dot map, it's not that interesting to color dots, I think. I think it's much more telling to color the polygon around the dot. So if I have like subway stations and I want to do something, or city bike's great because it's like inherently by design evenly spread. So doing a Voronoi map, and then instead of coloring the dot by the color, doing the area closest to the station, it's just a much more appealing visualization to me. And once again, that's kind of like, you have a polygon file and a GIS, like make a Voronoi layer, and then there it is. I'm like, all right, that was cool. So not just like one idea, but also that idea should be simple when I'm trying to reach people. And that's not always, like, you can't always do that. Sometimes you have some complex model and you're trying to predict the world, and that's fine. In my work on the blog, that's not what I'm trying to do right now. I'm just trying to tell kind of simple stories. And so when people hear like, oh, you do math, they think like things like this. But it's more kind of just like, things like this. There's not that much going on in any of these posts that I'm doing. One of my favorites was just looking at parking tickets, one of my favorite subjects, and looking at the percent of parking tickets from out-of-state license plates. I was like, oh, where do tourists go in New York? Or, it's a proxy. It's not great. It's a proxy. And as you see, as you get farther from the center of New York, the percentage of parking tickets given to non-New York state plates drops dramatically. But in this area. And then I was like, well, we can do this by state, right? So let's look by state. New Jersey seems to just like, they don't really go into Brooklyn. They're just in Midtown hanging out. What's that? There's a little bit here. Yeah, there's a little bit. It's a little bit lighter here, but like really, the bright area is here. I mean, in essence, there's a bridge here from New Jersey, so that might play a role. Connecticut comes in from the north. You can kind of see it. That's where Connecticut is. That makes sense. And my favorite is you can actually sort of get data that Californians are hip because they only go to like the hippest parts of Brooklyn to get tickets. So, Williamsburg. That's right, California. That's where we get our tickets. So that's sort of a story I didn't expect to find in there, but then when I ran the numbers, I got really excited. It's like that, that's the, I try to explain it by them being cool. I think maybe that's it. Could also be there's some like California-based mega company there, but I'm pretty sure
People
that.
just register their cars from that in other states for insurance.
Yep. So there's two reasons why it's not people who are visiting. So there's people who try to do insurance purposes, but doing California instead of New York is not a good move. Probably depending on where you live in California, you probably do like some other. Florida's a big one, or they haven't had time to sort of change their thing. So yeah, granted, these could be either they're transplants in California, which is probably a reasonable percentage, or they're visiting California. Maybe even more likely transplants. But either way, it's Californians gathering in that area. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then I just, for fun, aggregated per state the total number of dollars given to the New York City parking ticket economy. So like every year we get $2 million from Texas, $2 million, 1.5 from Florida, $8 million from Florida, which is pretty cool. And I don't know, that was just a fun little project I was doing for fun. And then I also say I like to focus on an area that I kind of have some instinct in. Taking the time to understand the thing you're working on really pays off, because I don't know if you ever do these Kaggle competitions, and like some of them they're like the columns are like random variable 1, random variable 2, random variable 3, and your job is to like predict something. You like don't have it's like really hard. I mean you can do it, but you can't really use any insight, right? So I like to use things where and they say in improv like a lawyer doing like a scene with a lawyer and it's probably going to go really well because they know like all the jargon and sticking things, but when you're stepping out of your comfort zone, it becomes a little harder. So I think that's true about sort of this data science world. So this is a view of the average amount of revenue being generated in New York City cabs per minute over time. So this is basically, and there's just saying this shift change problem in New York. I don't know if you know about it. Between 4 and 5 p.m., you go try to hail a cab. It doesn't really go very well. It's kind of it's been bothering mayors since Ed Koch was complaining about it. This yellow line is the revenue being made. The shift change is around 4 to 5 p.m. and you can really see it in the plot of dollars being made by our entire fleet. This is about 3% of the entire fleet's revenue being lost to this shift change problem. Okay, why do they all change shifts at the same time? That's like the first question. This doesn't make any sense, right? Turns out that if you take the rolling 12-hour amount of money you can make in the previous 12 hours and the next 12 hours. So if you work from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m., you can make about the same amount of money as someone who works from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. But if you work from 1 a.m. to 1 p.m., you're going to make way less money than the guy who works from 1 p.m. to 1 a.m. So there's only one equilibrium point. So this is the rolling 12-hour amount of money you can make. And where they cross is the best place for us to change keys and have us both make the same amount of money, right? So no pair of drivers, by the way, by law, the shifts here are 2 12-hour shifts. No pair of drivers wants one driver to make more than the other. And they all have the same equilibrium point, and therefore New York City loses a big chunk of revenue because everyone's changing cabs at the same time. This is where we are today. This I was able to analyze once again with this FOIL data. And then I got the pleasure of being called in to the Tech and Museum Commission and speaking to the commissioner there about these findings, which is really cool. So that's sort of why I'm like, yeah, release more data and you can get more of this kind of stuff. It turns out the really interesting part of this is that, so the proposed solution that I put forward is that, look, you need to make the cars when you rent them different prices. So if I rent the car from 1 a.m., we have these fleet owners and they rent out the cabs to the drivers and they pay a fee. Today that fee is flat. But imagine if I could say, well, I'll rent it to you from 1 a.m. to 1 p.m. and you'll get $200 off. And the person who's doing 1 p.m. to 1 a.m. pays $200 more. So, and then the amount of money they make now can kind of be balanced. So suddenly we create this equilibrium. But the problem is the city is capped by law the amount that you can charge for a single rental. So they can't do this. They can't raise one and lower one and do a sliding scale because this is a cap. So they're kind of stuck. So we've legislated our way into this corner, which is kind of forcing all these things. By the way, the city also tried to solve this by making a rush hour surcharge. If you ever get in a cab today, that's what that is. That was a fight against this. What they didn't realize is that by doing that, they would actually give all the extra money to the late driver because that was the rush hour driver. And then the earlier driver would be like, wait, why is the late driver getting more money? Let's change keys later. So it would pull the equilibrium point farther to the right into rush hour. So it didn't have the effect that they had hoped. They hoped that putting a bunch of money into the problem, all these cabs would drive, but it actually made people want to change even in a worse time. So this is where we are today. And by the way, there was some work, this is hard to see, but this is from Bloomberg Business Week, looking at taxi tipping, which was kind of interesting. They want to know what percent we tip when we get in the cab. You know when you get in the back and it's like, do you want to tip 20, 25, or 30%, or other, right? So a lot of us choose 20%, a lot of us choose 25, a lot of us choose 30. This Bloomberg article, it's hard to see, but you can kind of see. Also notice that tips go up by about 1% during rush hour, which is kind of weird. Like, why would tips go up by 1% during rush hour? It's kind of strange. So they reached out. Whenever you have a data problem, what do? You go try to find an explanation, right? Because if you're doing data analysis, you find something, you better explain it. So they reached out to the executive director of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance and said, excuse me, why is there a 1% tip hike during rush hour? She said, well, during rush hour, people appreciate the privacy and convenience of a taxi more than being in a subway. Most of the riders who take taxis in those hours are regulars who tend to talk more to drivers, have a more sensitive understanding of driver economics. That's what I call post hoc rationalization. It's like you see a data set, and then you come up with an explanation. Any one of you could probably come up with an explanation. We can all come up with explanations all day. And that's one of the dangers of doing data science. It's like you do something, you try to explain it, but is your explanation right? Well, when I looked here, I noticed something funny about the data set, and that's the 20% bar, and that's the 21% bar, okay? But look, here's the 19% bar. And I was like, hold on. Why are there 10 times more people tipping 21% than 19%? Because either they're hitting that 20% button or they're not. Why is everyone who's doing the other rounding up and no one rounding down? This doesn't make sense. And what's cool about, once again, I could actually go and look at Bloomberg's work. I could check their work because it's public data. This is what we can do. So it turned out that when you calculate, you ever think about when you hit the 20% button, what are you paying 20% of? You ever stop and think about that? The answer is, well, is it the fare amount? Is it the surcharges, like the rush hour surcharge? Is it taxes? Is it the tolls you're going through? We probably don't stop and think about that. It turns out that when they did their analysis, they just assumed it was the fare amount. But it was actually the fare amount and the surcharge. So what happened is what they considered a 20% tip during rush hour, a 21% tip during rush hour is actually a 20% tip on a bigger number, right? So all this thing, this rush hour thing didn't exist. There was no increase in rush hour. It's just that they were doing their math wrong because they were using the fare amount and the machine was going on top of the surcharge. So if we actually fix that, we get something that looks more like this, which is a lot cleaner. To 20%, about 45% of us use the 20% button, 12% use 25%, and 4 to 5% use the 30% button. And then the people who hit other, not too strangely, aren't all clustered at 20, right? They're hitting other for a reason, usually because they think it's too much. And so you can see that other people are now kind of centered around 15, which makes a lot more sense than what they saw. So I guess my takeaway there is make your work reproducible. Whether you're a journalist, you're a data scientist, whatever it is, when you're publishing, make sure that people can get access to that data because, look, we all make mistakes. I'm sure I make mistakes in my work. Having the ability to have someone go back, that's what science is. If data has the word, if we're going to call it data science, we should probably live up to the standards of science and make things reproducible. Something I believe strongly in. Yeah. Yeah. So what happened is the rush hour surcharge, imagine it's a $10 fare, but with the surcharge it's 11.
Just in the rush hour.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that could, yeah, and I'll get back to some other gotchas later on that. Okay, so some takeaways from data storytelling, connect with people, try to keep things simple, I think is good. Don't get carried away. That's not always allowed. You can't always do that when you're doing modeling of things, but when you're doing kind of descriptive statistics, keep it simple. Try to look at things and get to know the things you're working on, and reproducibility, I think, is key for good work. So lastly, I'll talk about some of the impact I've had here in New York, starting with, I guess, what was my biggest post. It was a few million hits. It was pretty remarkable. What I found is that when you ride in the New York City subway, this isn't even like data science. This is just kind of percentages. It's really funny. But I kept having balance on my end to MetroCard. So I went and I did the math, and I realized that if you use the MetroCard machines, and no matter how many times you hit their buttons and you ride, you literally can't zero out your balance. It's literally impossible because they have that bonus. And the bonus makes it off. And once you're off on their bonus, you literally can't zero out your card. So I told people, hey, look, memorize this number. I think it was at the time, before they changed everything, it was 1905. And if you hit other amounts, you type 1905, you got exactly, I guess it was $20 on your card, as opposed to 1995. If you hit their button, you were 5 cents short of your last ride, which is so annoying. So you'd have $2.45, and you'd be like, this sucks. So I wrote about this, and it kind of spread around, and the MTA responded, these machines do not hold an infinite amount of change, thank you. And the denominations are suggested to ensure there is ample change to accommodate customers who pay with cash. That being said, we will certainly look at this as part of the process involved in rolling out the next scheduled fare increase slated for next year. So there's some good points there, though I would argue that the credit card machines don't really abide by this explanation, but fine. We'll give them. So the fare increase came this year, and I'm like, all right, what do we got? And I was expecting nothing, right? Because why would anything happen? But I was so excited. They added this new button for me, which is great. So now instead of, this is $10, $20, $40 in cash when you pay, there's this new one, if you find, it says $27.25. And you might say, what? 10, 20, 40, 27, 25. If you hit that button, I think you get exactly like, I think it's 11. I'm doing math in my head right now. You get exactly 11 rides. And so it's the only button where if you hit it, you won't have any leftover balance. So if you're ever refilling your card, and they don't give you any indication of that, you wouldn't have to know it. Yes?
I can see them having another explanation, which I guess it gives, maybe they were thinking of it, but they don't want people to use new Metro cards every time.
Yeah, but they have a fee for that.
Yeah, but they do have a fee.
Right, so they're already people don't want to spend that fee, so they've already got that covered.
Yeah.
But
I
the
agree.
problem existed before the fee was put in place.
It did, but then now the fee's there, and so now you'd hope that they would pay. And think about this: my big beef is that where in the world you go in, and you go into a store, you're like, I want 2 apples, and they'll be, that's $2. Thank you very much. In our New York City subway system, we cannot go in and say, hi, I'd like 2 rides. There's no interface to do that. We can't do that. We have to think about math, divide by a percentage. This is the only. It makes no sense. It's the only transaction where you say, "Here's $10. Okay, you can have $11.82." Like it doesn't. Where does that happen in the world? Only on the New York City subway system. It would be so bizarre that we can't sell rides by the number we want to buy. Why can't it just? It's crazy. But this is where we are today. This is their way to appease me for a little while. It worked. I'm pretty excited. They added a button. But yeah.
It's 25 cents. How does that work out?
Just because there's a $3 bonus, and then the current rides are like $275. So if you add 20, you get 30, 25 divided by 275. It works out to something.
The same thing DC. 2-0.
Yeah, it's interesting. So some other stuff I did. I looked at New York City health inspection grades. You have A, B, and C. Green is A, blue is B, red is C. And I just counted the number of restaurants with each thing. And it turns out that there's a lot of clustering at the lowest A possible, and then when you get to the highest B possible, it just plummets. Which is kind of weird because these are 1- and 2-point violations being summed up. So what's happening is, why is it that when our inspectors go in and they have the cockroach here and the mouse there and the cold thing here, why is it just always adding up to 12 and 13 and never 14 and 15, right? I mean, I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing there's a little bit of human compassion going on there, which maybe is not such a bad thing unless you're getting someone on a bad day. Then it's not really fair. Our system's obviously got something a little wrong with it. And I'd like to see the city maybe they can have 2 inspectors, each do half, and then that would go away, right? Or maybe there's other solutions they can have. They can also go in and look per inspector who does this, and then follow up with those inspectors. We'll see. So I wrote about that, and the city responded. The Department of Health said, the inspectors are not instructed to offer leniency, just to cite what they see. The final score is based on the extent of the violation that the inspectors observed. Didn't really say anything. So sometimes they say things that don't really make a ton of sense. Huh? What's that? A few more. This is the back to the taxi data. Now, to the question before, 20% of what, right? What really got crazy about this data set was that it depended on the computer in the back of the machine. New York had 2 computer systems, Verifone and Creative Mobile Technologies. I think one has like the Way to Ride app and one has the other app. They're just 2 different competitors. They each have about half our market. It turned out that the Creative Mobile Technology computer in the back, when you hit the 20% button, was tipping on top of your fare and taxes and tolls. So if you go through the Battery Tunnel, you're paying toll on that. But the Verifone cabs were not. So your tip depended on the cab you were in, which is crazy in such a highly regulated environment. This is something that no one was talking about until the data gets public, and then suddenly we can make some observations. And this is an example of, for example, this is 2 rides, one ride line queue. That's Creative Mobile Technology. A 1550 ride of 20% tip was a 320 tip, and this is a $16 ride of 20% tip. It's a 320 tip. So the tips are the same using the 20% button, but there's 2 different computer systems. So I wrote about that, and the Taxi Limousine Commission said, we appreciate the work that went into the analysis, and we're giving it a thorough read. All right. A week or 2 later, they did reprogram half the cabs in New York. It wasn't the way I had anticipated. Now all cabs tip on top of tolls. But honestly, half the fleet the drivers were making $300 to $400 more a year, half our drivers, versus the other half. It wasn't really fair. right? So I'm actually okay with that change. If they want to justify why you took on top of tolls, that's a whole other discussion. At least now you don't have to think when you're going to travel, oh, what am I going to try? I don't know. So it's a step in the right direction. A few more before I finish. If you've noticed in the back of NYPD cars over the last few weeks, they all have Twitter handles. Go out and look. Like they're all, every cab, go and look at any police car now, they all have Twitter handles on them. So they're starting to use Twitter, and they say things like this. The 5th precinct had a 150% increase in bicycle collisions this year. Police officers will be enforcing violations by bicyclists. Hashtag bike space safety. All right? So I was like, 115% increase. That's carnage. Like, the collisions are going crazy. So I was like, we got data on this, right? We've got this beautiful data set. I should mention, by the way, the stuff that was scraped off the PDF at the beginning, the bicycle collisions, had been released by the de Blasio administration. So now it's actually available. You'll see the motor vehicle collision data online. That's where this came from. I went and analyzed this. Is it true 115% increase? And I found out it wasn't, and they responded with this quote. So, I was like, hashtag show your work, but it didn't go anywhere. And lastly, what was I guess my overall favorite still, it was a while back, but I'm very excited about it. But this is a map of fire hydrants in New York City. And it's mapped by the amount of revenue that every hydrant's making in parking tickets. So it turns out that the Upper East Side loves to give parking tickets for fire hydrants, like 2 to 3 times more than other neighborhoods. And not because they have more fire hydrants, just because they're maybe more strict. But I found these 2 hydrants in the Lower East Side that were making over $55,000 a year. So these hydrants were making minimum wage just hanging out being a hydrant. I was pretty jealous. Like, what is this about? How do they make that much money? For like 5 or 10 years this is happening. So I was like, all right, let's go investigate from my couch. And then was able to find that there was this hydrant here, and then there was this thing that looked like a bike lane. And then there was a parking spot. So what happened is the Department of Transportation painted a parking spot. And they thought it was a fine parking spot. But the NYPD disagreed on this designation. And this went on for 5, 6, 7 years. And these did not cheap tickets. And that doesn't include towing fees, by the way, my analysis. So I can only imagine that it was much worse. And even like the Google Street View car drove by. And I saw this shot, which had a ticket on his windshield that the Google Street View car saw. Now, there was a hanger with a sign on it in front of one of these hydrants. And in Chinese, it said, "Do not park here." So at least some people knew that there was a place to avoid. But for non-Chinese speakers, it was probably a trap. So when I wrote about this, it turned out, by the way, that it wasn't a bike lane. It looked like a bike lane. There were bicyclists on it riding by. But it's actually called a curb extension because it's technically not a bike lane because they just wanted to make the curb bigger. And you would never know in a million years. I guess it doesn't have the bicycle symbol. If it was a bike lane, I think the law says that you can park there. But because it was a curb extension mystery, you're not allowed to. Anyway, I wrote about it and actually made it to it was first in the Post, and it was in the London Daily Mail, and then it kind of went around the world, these hydrants, so that the city had to respond. Well, the DOT has not received any complaints about this location. We'll review the roadway markings and make any appropriate alterations. And I was like, oh, here we go again. But what was cool, as I mentioned, is that they repainted the spots, which I was really excited about. And I thought it was a great sort of symbolic moment because it was like, taking local data. Like when you're a citizen and you're complaining about something, you're just like an annoying citizen. But if you're a citizen and you have data and you're complaining about something, you're an annoying citizen with data. And that's you get more results. Like you can actually quantify what it is. If you're like, I have this feeling this law is not fair, they're like, all right, thank you. If you're like, no, this is the largest place in all of New York City, now you've got someone's ears. And what's so cool is that I don't expect our agencies to sit and think about this stuff, but we all live in our own neighborhoods. We all have access to local data. You can start to really understand your own local environment with open data and start to ask the questions that other people aren't going to have time to ask or care to ask. So this is kind of, to me, symbolic of what the future might hold for open data.
Have you left recently with parking ticket violations? I got that.
Oh, at that location? I haven't, but I did. Sadly enough, I did.
New Yorkers are stubborn.
They are. And so if you go on Google Street View today and look at the picture, there is a car parked here. I can hope that it's much less. Huh?
On top of the stripes?
Yeah, on top of the stripes. If you were to bring it up right now. Yeah. So, but I'm pretty sure at least it's reduced. I mean, it's got to be way reduced. But I thought that was pretty funny. I didn't include it because it was sad. But now that you brought it up, it's okay. So, what's that? It was the same. It looked the same. It was in a similar. It was a block down, and it did the same thing. So I guess in closing, look, policy is going in a great direction. And by the way, this isn't, I talked about New York today. There's a great website called the Open Data Census. And if you go there, you can see every city is a row, and then every type of data is a column, and then all the attributes and links are the cells. And it's awesome if you're interested in other cities. And it's actually not just in the United States, it's global. So you can say, in England, what is the city? And everything has a ranking and scoring. It's a great source to get into open data in a city other than New York. I couldn't recommend it enough. And all that has led, I just got I'm excited, I just got I'm going to be writing a book with Penguin on using sort of open data and what it tells us about human nature in cities across the country. So that's going to be a few years, but I just got that signed, so I'm pretty excited about that. So there is sort of this interest in data in the public realm. So in closing, look, the policy, as I said, is going in the right direction. The users need to speak. People don't understand why having this delimiter is bad, or why this code is not like our agencies aren't going to be at a technical level to understand, and so you need ways of kind of feedback loop. The cycle today has been through the big apps competition, but I'm calling on city agencies to create open data liaisons. We have intergovernment people who, for each agency, talk to other government officials. Let's start getting people who are data literate into our city agencies, so that we can have smart conversations with our agencies and begin to sort of fix some of these problems at the root cause. So there's a lot going on there. As I said, I really think simplicity is big when you can. There's Occam's razor, of course, when doing modeling as well. Simple models tend to outperform more complicated ones, all else being equal. By taking your time, you can really have an impact by following some of this stuff. And I found that the impact has been quite fun. I'm waiting for sort of fire call information to come out from New York City so we can start modeling where the next fires are going to be. Our crime data is still in PDF form, though that's supposed to change soon, so there's exciting momentum happening. And speaking of exciting momentum, press release came out today by the de Blasio administration. This morning, I haven't actually even had time to read it, though somebody had pulled out some quotes. So I've been kind of going around and even got kind of a platform with TED to talk about some of the problems with New York City Open Data, which has put a lot of pressure. Which has been really, really cool. And I found that this release today from the de Blasio administration called Open Data for All, saying open data is an invitation for anyone, anywhere, anytime to engage with New York City. This sounds like a very different open data rhetoric than you're seeing from Bloomberg. For the first time, we're seeing this out of our agencies. They said every New Yorker can benefit from open data, which is in line with kind of what I'm hoping for. They also said we'll be releasing monthly updates so you know what's going on and clearly see what's new, what's different, and what's coming up. We'll see how they stick to that. DOITT, which is the Department of Information, Telecommunication and Technology, I think, and MODA, which is the Mayor's Office of Data and Analytics. It's kind of the New York Times called it the Mayor's Geek Squad. We'll be conducting a citywide engagement tour, and the citywide engagement tour will culminate in an Open Data Summit in the late fall. We'll bring together everything that we learned and set the stage for future straight gig initiatives. I don't know what straight gig is. Thank you. That must be a bad copy paste. Yeah, it was a new line, I guess. Thank you. That makes more sense. You guys are smarter than I am. So that's just today. So there's movement. It's an exciting time to be doing this kind of work. And I guess that's all I have for you. So thanks so much for listening. Yeah. Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody have any questions?
Back there, yeah.
You had a couple of suggestions sprinkled through the presentation on how the city can better pursue open data policies. What's one thing, like if you could be like God for a day and put one policy on the city in the next year, what would be
All data sets or maps that you release include a link to your data source. We have things like Crime Map NYC, which is great for zooming in and seeing crimes, but you can't do anything with it. We've got Plow NYC, which is great for seeing what streets were plowed in the last 2 hours, but we can't analyze any of the prior storms. We've got maps, data set, all these things where people just do analysis, and it's great they're doing the analysis, but if they just give access to the underlying data, we can multiply that by 100. Instead of having one person's analysis, we can do 100 people analysis. So honestly, I wish all data had to be, by requirement, had to have a link to the CSV, even if they're putting out a PDF. Yeah.
You hear from a lot of people working in large data sets that when you're working with so much data that we just care more about the kind of what the relationships are, and we don't care anymore about the why. Like we don't seek causality. understand why things are happening.
Yeah.
And it seems like so much of what you do, your blog and your storytelling that you talked about today, relies on kind of going past one further and kind of starting to speculate and almost kind of understand why. And so I just think that's interesting. Did you intend to be a storyteller, or do you intend to be a? I didn't
have intentions. I've just been kind of messing around and having fun with it. But I will say that I don't know. I do 3-on-1 analysis, and there's problems there. There are biases. Who calls 3-on-1? It's not evenly distributed through our population, right? Maybe the socioeconomic background of somebody determines the likelihood of calling 3-on-1. So if we start doing analysis there are problems. Who gets parking tickets? Well, only people with cars. So now I'm not talking about Californians. I'm talking about Californians who drive their car. There's all these issues with everything I do. My goal is to take. I kind of see these as jump-off points for people who actually want to go and do proper deep dive scientific studies of something that they might find appealing. So I would hope that I try to write caveats at the end of all my posts, saying, hey, look, there's this problem, there's this problem, there's this problem. But certainly causality is a big issue, and I try to be careful when I'm inferring stuff. But in the world of large scientific studies, it's just a slow-moving world, right? If I want to learn something about education in New York City, and I need to do a trial of something, I'm going to roll it out. It's going to be some $50 million 10-year plan, right? And I'm going to go out to the classrooms. But if I can download the school survey information, and maybe it's not as good because it's not controlled, but start to get 10 different data sets and tell a similar story, maybe that'll help me design that study better, or maybe I won't do that study after doing that. So there's a place for there's certainly a place for these large studies that are in-depth, but I'm kind of trying to find a rapid-fire iterative research cycle where we can just kind of make quick things and say, okay, there are all these problems, and so let's not call it Killingsburg, even if it kind of gets interpreted that way. But there's still value for people who do want to go deep dive, right? So I think for any environmentalist, they see my fecal map. I would hope they would then go and study what that means instead of me just being like, I don't know, yeah, it's 90%. I don't know what that means. But somebody out there does, and I hope they're inspired. Yeah.
I just wonder what the status of web services is like REST and stuff. Does the administration of New York City offer that, or are there any plans to do that? And because you haven't mentioned it yet.
Yeah. So Crata, the middle the website that kind of houses it all does have some APIs that you can actually access a lot of this stuff for. So anything that's made its way onto that portal, I think, is accessible via sort of web services and APIs and other such approaches. Because I'm not building websites that are dynamic and apps and stuff. I haven't personally messed around with those, but I know that a lot of people use them for for various causes. So yeah.
But the evidence of that
from the city itself,
yeah.
I can't recall any. There was one by there was one example where the Department of DOITT worked with the Department of Sanitation to open up an API for the plow thing. And then all these people found out about it, and they started hitting it. And then they were like, you're going to bring down the production website. All this, they shut it off. So there was an hour where there was a web something. But, I think that it'll take time. And that's I hope the future brings a lot of that.
But anything in the open
data portal should be accessible.
Data portal has that.
Yeah, it should.
Is it your sense that are agencies that haven't released their data, is it because they're resistant, they want to keep ownership of it even though they're technically not supposed to, or just because they don't feel like it's their job or they don't have the budget to do the technical work to
it's hard,
put it out there?
It's a great question. It's hard to tell. There's certain ones that I've seen are definitely political.
The police data is all aggregate. For the most part, you only get aggregates and stuff.
Yeah, so that's political. That's a decision that we're not yet ready to release that. It's not technological. So there's some political issues there. Some agencies maybe just don't have the budget to actually go and do something. You don't really. That's a problem. We don't really have the openness to know whether it's usually either privacy, politics, or technology, right?
There's no sense. But your sense is not one.
It's mixed. It's totally mixed. Certainly, the NYPD stuff feels political. The TLC right now is actually, of all things, technological. Though they're getting over that hurdle. And certain agencies, they may get their PDFs from some government contractor, right? So you go and talk to them about where it came from, and they're like, yeah, this company, and they don't know. I had a back and forth with the Scott Stringer's office, the comptroller. I did some work and kind of gave him a hard time in a blog post, which was basically like, in order to get data, they had this data set which was all lawsuits against the NYPD and how much they were paying out over time. And they made this map, but they didn't release the underlying data. So I guess a friend showed me how to pull it. It was in a Google Fusion something. I'm not familiar with all this stuff. So a friend showed me how you can just pull it using some code. So I was able to download it all and analyze it. And then on my post, there was something like, there's a little bit of irony that the comptroller, who's all about visibility, is posting a map and not giving us underlying data. And they emailed me the next day. Hey, I don't like what you said. You never asked for the data. And I said, I shouldn't. That's the point. Like, I wouldn't know to ask for it. Like, that's not what open data is. We're going to waste everyone's time. It's kind of up to you guys to do that. Then they said something like, oh, well, we haven't figured out how to do that yet. And that was a little weird to me, that they can create like this Google Fusion map and not put a CSV file. They claim it's technological. Who am I to say whether it is? But that's sort of, the type of interactions that I've seen. Some stuff over here, yeah.
I know this is maybe off your radar, seeing what we're talking about. K-12 education, and maybe even at the state level. What's the status of accessibility and that kind of, all the data that they have?
Yeah, the Department of Education in New York hasn't been the best at releasing stuff. We do have the school survey it's a really cool data set. It's pretty big, and every student has to, and parent and teacher every year has to rank how safe they feel, how good they feel at education they're getting, and that's really interesting. You can start to see that like parents think larger schools are less safe, and teachers don't, and students are right in between. And everything I studied, students were always in between the parents and the teachers on one side of things. That's a cool data set to play with. As far as like attendance and other such things, we're not seeing that yet, though I think that was in the list of things that they might be putting out. You have to kind of go agency by agency and think about what is being asked. And then you have agencies like EDC, which is the Economic Development Corporation of New York, or NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, which are not technically city agencies, and therefore are not covered by the open data laws, and therefore are not participating very well. So NYCHA is an enormous amount of our housing in New York is coming from the New York City Housing Authority, our public housing, and the data is just awful. And there's not, we haven't gotten the political pressure yet to turn that around, and there's not the legislation. So, yeah.
What kind of tools do you use?
So if I'm feeling lazy, and the thing I can do is not very big, and I'm not afraid of using an Excel pivot table. I'll be honest with you. If it's a small data set and I can count like the number of accidents per intersection by dragging and dropping, like I'll do that. I'm the first to admit it. If it's bigger, or I need to do something like a median, God forbid, which Excel pivot tables cannot do, or need to do something a little more complicated, I tend to use pandas and Python for myself. Though people use all sorts of things, and I'm a huge fan of the notebook environments. That's where I really do all my work. So like IPython is the one in Python where you have cells and you basically iteratively compile and run code in sort of a story format. So it's like, you can go back and say, oh, I did this, and then keep going forward, and there are these cells that you keep executing. Beaker is one that actually 2 Sigma is behind and is an open source notebook. And that one, the cool thing there is that you can actually go run R code and then load it in Python and then load it in JavaScript, all in one notebook environment. So you can actually cross languages. So if you're comfortable with multiple languages and want to learn, Beaker's pretty cool for that. So.
Spell Beaker?
BeakerNotebook.com. Yeah. Just like BEAKER. Anything else?
All right. That it? One more?
Last one? Let's do it.
I was wondering what your opinion is of the work on sites like 538.
Say it again?
I was wondering what your opinion is of the work on sites like 538 and whether or not you can classify what you do as data journalism.
That is an excellent question. I've struggled with that. I've been contacted by many a site asking, looking at possibly writing sort of on a data journalism thing. I have not called myself a data journalist because I have no formal knowledge of journalism and feel that I don't know enough about journalism to call myself a data journalist. I don't know. Who am I to say what I am? Though others have written about my work as data journalism, so I don't know. But I do enjoy sort of telling stories. I've done some work with the New Yorker, and I probably will continue to do some stuff with them. And sites like 538 are great. Like it's all really cool stuff. I enjoy it all. I really love what like WNYC does here in New York, and the Upshot New York Times stuff is really cool. So kind of a growing area, but those are kind of specialized data journalist sites. But then everyone also is starting to want data journalism, integrated. So whether it's Slate or Vice or all these guys are like, oh, we need a little bit more data analysis to tell our stories. So data journalism is coming out of the kind of boutique and heading into the mainstream very, very quickly, from what I can tell. So.
Okay.
You want to say something?
Yeah. For people being my meetup before know I have a tradition to vote for the speaker tonight.
To what?
Vote for the speaker tonight. How do you like it? Can you stand here?
Wait, I'm so confused. What is that? How does this
Can
work?
you stand here?
Is it like yay or nay?
It's like the
Yeah,
Coliseum.
yeah.
Yeah. Where's the lion?
And turn around. Turn your back to the. Here. Sorry.
What is going on?
A little bit further. A little closer to the audience.
Okay.
Guys, if you like his talk, do this. If you really like it, in the sky. If you don't like it, do this.
Oh my God.
Okay. All vote. Awesome.
That was close. I'll check that later.
I'm going to say some closing remarks, but before she does, I just want to say we have a lot of sandwiches left over, so please eat sandwiches before you leave.
I saw all the
Sandwiches. Yeah, sandwiches.
I saw all hands in the air, and I appreciate Ben spent precious 3 hours with us, special in the moment he's expecting firstborn.
That is true.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Everyone really enjoyed it. Good job.
Thank you.